Welcome to this edition of Your Questions Answered with Father Gruner. I'm John Veneri. In this program, as you know, we take your questions that you send to us via email. Continue to send the questions to us, questions@thefatimacenter.com. Here's today's question. It's somewhat of an apocalyptic question, and it says, a person writes, quote, "Will the Antichrist come before or after the chastisement and the conversion of Russia?"
Well, first of all, there's a number of questions inside here. There are those, certainly, and with good reason, who say we're already suffering the spiritual chastisement since 1960. And the spiritual chastisement, of course, is bad priests. As St. John Eudes says that priests, cardinals, bishops, even popes, the chastisement, St. John Eudes says that when God is really angry with his people, he sends them bad priests who are not shepherds but are wolves in sheep's clothing, who lead people to hell. And so that chastisement, since talks about it in the secret 1960, we've been suffering under that for the last 54 years now. So I expect she's talking about a physical chastisement predicted at some other operation sites, and certainly Akita among others, which is approved, and certainly Garabandal, which is not approved. And so the chastisement talked about at Garabandal will take place if people do not convert before they have, after they've seen the miracle comes, and after the warning. So we don't have to have the chastisement, but it looks like we're on the way to having a chastisement, even worse than what we got right now. And the conversion of Russia, it's predicted, certainly in the message of Fatima, in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me. Russia will be converted. So the conversion of Russia cannot take place without the consecration of Russia, and the consecration and the conversion of Russia will take place. The question now is about the timetable. Will the Antichrist come before or after? Well, if the Pope were to do the consecration of Russia tomorrow, I mean, literally in the calendar year 2014, the Antichrist wouldn't come. However, if the consecration of Russia is not done soon, there are certainly people who hold that the Antichrist would follow after the annihilation of nations and after the smoke clears, which some people think America will win. I don't know. I think it's more likely that Russia will win, but Russia may not win either, because after that, China will come in behind them after they've struggled out, and that's where the Antichrist would come in after they've established the one world government under China. Anyway, those are some of these things but the real question behind all this is the Antichrist come before the end of time or not? At the end of in other words, with the general judgment. And there are two schools of thought in the fathers of the church. The St. Augustine certainly, and the common school of thought is that the Antichrist will come just before Christ comes for the second coming. And when the Antichrist comes, he's in charge, or has a rule for 3.5 years, 42 months, which then Christ comes and kills him with the breath of his mouth, followed by the general judgment. That is the common understanding, of which case then, if you have the Antichrist come, and that's the scenario, then we won't have the conversion of Russia. Because there's no end. Once the Antichrist comes, he's in place, and then you have the general judgment. Now, there's a second school of thought. It's a much smaller group of people among the fathers of the church, and until St. Augustine came along, it had more, shall we say, more people following it. But it's still not. There's not unanimity of the fathers, and therefore this interpretation is that the Antichrist will come sometime before the general judgment. That Christ will kill the Antichrist with the breath of his mouth, but not everyone. It's not like the second coming. He will appear like he's appeared to Saint Margaret Mary, not of course in love, not in chastisement, but in this case he would come and he would be seen by the Antichrist and be killed, whereas the general world. Then the reign of Christ, the reign of the kingdom of Christ on earth, with the conversion of Russia and whatnot, would take place after that. So, to answer your question, I don't know. Okay.
Yes, well, there's a book I've never read, actually, but it said it's one of the best books on the apocalypse, and that is The Book of Destiny by
Father Bernard Kramer.
Father Bernard Kramer,
yes.
And And but he really opens things up
Yes.
there. I remember there's one section that I read and actually wrote about was he talked about I think it was the plague of locusts, because these prophecies are not only for the end of time, but they also are leading up to
Yes.
these things, and they are events that open the door for evil and for an Antichrist mentality. But he had Martin Luther and the Protestant revolt as the plague of locusts. Okay. And I didn't take a look at this before we did the program, but he makes the connection that the damage that was done was like, locusts destroying the land. And so I'm just saying the fact that it's the apocalypse is a very rich book of the Bible.
Yes, absolutely.
And there's a lot of people out there interpreting it who think they understand it, who don't. So
yes. Well,
we look for guides like Father Bernard Kramer and others. So.
Well, certainly, and he, in fact, I've not read all the book either, but certainly takes he takes every verse and he interprets every verse. So if you want to find out what does chapter 12, verse 4 mean, you go to his chapter 12 and look down verse 4. That's where you find his interpretation which Pope John Paul II said that the message of Adam was a warning to not follow the tail of the dragon that takes down a third of the stars of heaven. What are the stars of heaven? That's the Catholic clergy. And he says that this prophecy is in the secret, it's in the message, or he says it's in the message. It's nowhere else in the message, so it's got to be in the secret.
It's got to be in the secret, yes.
And so that's how we've quoted, I believe, Father Bernard Kramer many times on this point, and that the third secret has to talk about the fall, that 1/3 of the priests have fallen into the service of the devil. And that's why, I said at the beginning that one of the chastisements is a spiritual chastisement.
And this is unprecedented. I mean, you look at the church prior to 1960, and then from 1960 onward, we have this avalanche of a collapse.
Yes.
That people. I mean, I read Monsignor Fenton, and he talks about this type of crisis of faith coming from the top, as it were, being unthinkable.
Well, just mention the word from the top. You have the quotation of Cardinal Chappie, who was the papal theologian from 1958 until I might have retired a year or two before his death in 1996 or thereabouts. In fact, Father Kramer met him just a few weeks before he died. In 1995, he wrote that in the third secret is foretold, among other things, the great apostasy in the church begins at the top. Well, why is the great apostasy? Well, the great apostasy has to precede, this St. Paul tells us that in 2 Thessalonians, the great apostasy has to precede the coming of the Antichrist. So if he says the great apostasy starts at the top, meaning from the Vatican, meaning from the Pope apparently, or certainly if it's not the Pope, the people around the Pope, so the great apostasy begins at the top, and obviously affects the whole church. The great apostasy sets the stage for the Antichrist to take over. Then the Antichrist reign only lasts 3.5 years, in which case then the conversion of Russia takes place after that. Then it's the first school of thought of the fathers, which is the one I mentioned last, which says that the Christ kills the Antichrist with the breath of his mouth, and then a period of history goes on after that. Because Our Lady says there will be an era of peace after the conversion of Russia.
So the Antichrist, of course, in the apocalypse is a big question with a lot of chapters and a lot of discussion. But that's all we'll do today on this. I'm sure it'll spark more questions, and we look forward to seeing you on the next program. Thank you.